Thank you, Lyndon. Our next speaker is Maurizio Salvi, Policy Advisor to the President of the EC, European Commission. He is the head of the European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies Secretariat. Dr. Salvi also leads the ethics sector in the Bureau of European Policy Advisors. He chairs the EC Inter-Service Group on Ethics and EU Politics, Secretary General of the EC International Dialogue on Bioethics, a platform that brings together national ethics councils from 42 countries. He's published extensively in bioethics, ethics and biotechnology, and in the philosophy of biology. Welcome. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Professor Goodman, Professor Wagner. On behalf of the President of the European Commission, let me express the gratitude for having been invited here today.
Good to have you.
And I hope that we can strengthen links fruitful between the two sides of the Atlantic. I now click to have the 10 minutes respected. And I'm going today to report you about 4 main elements in my presentation. First, why ethics count in European Union policies according to the constitutional treaty, the Lisbon Treaty being adopted. Second, that Europe is sharing a system where hard and soft law apply in clinical trials insofar ethics review of them and ethics approval are concerned. And the method being proposed is to have an institutionalization of the bioethics process, then hard law as a method for this, but with regard to the content is soft law approach applying, and then the principle of subsidiarity, then the different case-by-case assessment of the clinical trials being analyzed. And third, the fact that all this system works also because it has been established a mechanism to monitor its implementation. In the 3 different phases, the approval of the clinical trials, the implementation of the clinical trials through ethics audit, and also the output of the clinical trials in terms of product, medical product, for example. IPR, authorization of the marketing of medical products, with regard to ethics. I will be really quick in order to address all these items, but I'm open to questions from all of you. First, why ethics counts? We have in Europe now a new constitutional treaty. This treaty is called the Lisbon Treaty. And one integral component is the Charter of Fundamental Rights that Professor Nielsen just reported. This is a legally binding element. And the Charter is proposing a set of shared values. These shared values are just a kind of minimum denominator and inspiring mechanism for all European Union policies, including the one on research, clinical trials, marketing, patenting, and so on and so forth. This mechanism is advocated in the notion of Europe as a community of values by all the different legislative, executive, and administrative powers. And here I just reported some quoting by the President of the European Parliament, the President of the European Council, where member states negotiate, and also the President of the Commission, the executive power. The way how this approach and impact is on a kind of holistic way. And we are talking here about hard law. Legislative sphere on clinical trials, patent, research, data protection, medical product, use of animal research, but also current policy design of new areas such as ICT, security, defense, and so on and so forth, are all now take into consideration the role of fundamental rights protection in let's say, a normative viewpoint. As far the ethics and clinical trials, one element that is important to understand is that when we are talking about Europe, we are talking about an heterogeneous and complex machinery. Clinical trials can be addressed and regulated at the European Union level insofar this is at the supranational level, because there are interest and added value of approaching this use of research internationally. International, I mean between member states. On the basis of that, the Treaty of the European Union is attributing specific power, and clinical trial is one of the possibilities to be addressed at European level. But at the same time, it is also recognized the principle of subsidiarity where public health and also local regulation apply when clinical trials are carried out. All these mechanisms has to be integrated with this set of shared values, and then the result is a quite complex mechanism in which there is, but this has already been mentioned by previous speakers, legislative tools on clinical trials, on good clinical practice, but also on good manufacturing of products, and also the establishment of sources that have a relevance for the ethics committee, such as common databases of clinical trials being approved, and also the mechanism of reporting on negative results of clinical trials. These elements are accessible at all the European Union level. Talking about the specific legislation on clinical trials and the role of ethics, the method that I just advocated at the beginning requires that there is an approval by an ethics committee. What this directive has done in 2001 was to institutionalize the role of a research ethics committee, and this was a new mechanism by EU law and has created some pro and cons consequences. But the method was requested and defined in terms of conflict of interest rules, composition of the interdisciplinary research ethics committee, but not about the content or, let's say, the guidelines that this ethics committee had to do. The approach is that when the method is established, then it will be on a case-by-case basis of this committee to evaluate the research trials without having a prefixed set of norms that are universal or used in a standard way. The content of this mechanism is referred to the existing normative approach at the UN or international level, Council of Europe, and so on and so forth. But what has also been requested by this directive is that when there is an international clinical trials, it's not possible to have the approval of the trial when outside the EU if the same minimal standards requested in the EU are not applied. At the same time, there are specific norms, but here I'm not going into details because probably these are things that you may ask, otherwise we lose these 4 minutes that still have about the centralization of the mechanism when there are. But one element that I want to underline to you is that this is not a finished process. The directive is under revision, there is an open consultation ongoing, and the new legislative proposal to the codecision and the Parliament and the Council is expected to be in 2012. One element that it was mentioned by Professor Nielsen is one of the mechanisms to be sure that the ethics provisions are taken on board, and it is done by the authority authorizing the marketing of European medical products. You can see that this authority has the possibility to attribute or refuse the already attributed by member states licensing of medical product within the EU. They have to monitor that the good clinical practice provisions have been taken on board and all the ethics review approvals have been taken. And this is a way to have a mechanism of auditing and a mechanism also monitoring. And this not only for products resulting from clinical trials being done in the EU, but also internationally. At the same time, when the clinical trial is sponsored by the European Union, there is a legal basis on which the fundamental respect of basic principle is required. And an ethics review is accompanied to the one carried out in all member states where the research trials is taking place by independent experts. Then, if we want to summarize why this ethics review of international clinical trials is important, first is because it's requested by a kind of holistic approach where ethics count much more than in the past. Second, because it's a precondition of EU research funding. Third, of EU research authorization and clinical trial authorization. Fourth, because the products resulting from clinical trial will be not authorized to be marketed if this is not done. It will be not authorized to be patented. And at the same time, there will be mechanism also to implement auditing to see whether these conditions have been carried out not only at the moment of the proposal of the trials, but also when the trials was done. But with regard, really, the mechanism that the Commission is using, because of the socio-cultural diversity which characterizes Europe, you should understand that we have different socio-cultural entities, we have different languages, and we have a common approach only on minimum standards which are recognized and identified in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Then what the Commission is proposing through also the legislative frame is to facilitate local capacity in the different European Union member states to the Research Ethics Committee, and also when there are multi-center trials with the other region of the world. Then is an approach of capacity building of research ethics committees, which characterize also this mechanism. At the same time, the fact of respecting social cultural differences. This is just to show you what is the legal frame and the ethics frame. You recognize all the mechanisms and all the conventions that have been mentioned today. But just let me say where there are sometimes some divergency or where there are sometimes some difficulties. First, non-commercialization of human body is required by EU legislation and tissue banking directive. And this is also part of one article of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. The interpretation of this principle can be different when there are multi-center trials, actors, and countries. The non-profit involvement of volunteers, the notion of compensations, exploitations, reimbursement, in particular with the less developing country in terms of economic considerations, is really controversial. And what is required by the EU is the non-profit use. Informed consent procedure can vary. This is not mine. Data protection provisions are different because we have a strong legislation data protection that, for example, is not existing in some other region of the world. And then also the protection of vulnerable groups and the role of the Research Ethics Committee at the local level. This is just to conclude. Just to say what I've tried to explain to you, and I'm happy to discuss, is that in Europe we have this method where hard law apply to the mechanism, but where soft law apply to the content of the work of Research Ethics Committee. The case-by-case approach is the basis on which all the authorizations and all the evaluations of clinical trials at interpretational level are carried out. And this is because the mechanism of subsidiarity is one of the bases on which we work within the EU and with other regions of the world. And with that, I'm just happy to respond to all the possible questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you.